we're going to go over logic model components. In the end, it all boils down to three simple components for any logic model: activities, outputs, and outcomes. Now, before we really dive into this, I just want to explain briefly that while these are the terms that we use, a lot of other people use a lot of other terms. So much so, in fact, that someone built a Rosetta Stone so that you could track all the different terms and what they mean. But the thing about logic models is that they're a logical representation of a program. So if you know how to build one, you're going to be able to read any of them, no matter what the elements are called. Let's start with activities. These are our day-to-day. Activities are core components of the program. They're planned by staff, and they are not changes. Outputs. Outputs are products of our activities. So they're a direct result of the program's activities. They're quantifiable, they're tangible, and they are not changes. Now let's go over activities and outputs quickly. Activity is the giving, and the output is the receiving. So if I give the present, that's the activity. If Tuan receives that present, that's the output. So let's let Tony and Tuan describe this a little bit more. Here Tuan's writing a report. He's finishing it, and it is a big deal. He hands it to Tony. Tony thanks him for his hard work, and then tosses it out the window. This is a good example of the interaction between activities and outputs, but also a good example of activities not being changes and outputs not being changes, which is a pretty common mistake to make. So you'll note that when Tony tossed that report out the window, no change was ever going to come from that report. But an output still did happen because he received that report from Tuan. Now let's take the National School Lunch Program. Can you name one activity and one output of the National School Lunch Program? Write the activity and the output here, and then choose the one that you think is right from below. Now before we cover outcomes, let's look at types of change. These will help you to really grasp the concept of outcomes a little bit more and to be able to categorize your outcomes so you can think about them in better terms. So for example, estranged to a loving parent-child relationship, adversaries to partners, or suspicion to solidarity. The next would be a status change, say a vulnerable youth to a community leader. A behavior change, violent behavior to assertiveness, disrespecting women to not, ignoring youth to recognizing them. A circumstance change, maybe homeless to a stably housed youth, or a GED student to a graduate. An attitude change could be greater tolerance of different perspectives. A knowledge change might be math skills gained, knowledge of healthy eating habits gained. And a skills change would be, say, attaining cooking skills or advocacy skills. So let's go over outcomes now. Outcomes are intended changes that are a result of the programming. They're the changes that need to occur to reach that long-term outcome. Outcomes should be specific, a single idea or change. They should use simple language. Everyone should be able to understand your outcomes. And they should also be measurable. So let's look at outputs versus outcomes. What's the big fuss? Well, there is a big fuss because people get this wrong all the time. So again, outputs are a direct result of the program's activities. They're quantifiable, they're tangible, and they're not changes. An example, students attending tutoring sessions. Outcomes are intended changes that are a result of the programming. They're changes in knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors, among others. And an example would be increased grades. Let's take a GED class. No activity in the GED class will lead to an output of increased student scores. So GED class attendance will hopefully lead to change, but it's not the change. A youth getting 100% attendance in the GED class won't make any difference if that youth speaks Spanish and the GED instructor speaks English. Or if he spends all day staring out the window, trying to think of how to become a rock star. But the outputs do help determine whether the program will be able to achieve its outcomes. So if none of the students ever show up to class, there's no way that they're learning anything or going to get their GED. Or if they do, it's not a result of this program. So let's look at this pop quiz. Am I an output or an outcome? Youth receive case management. Students receive diplomas. Youth receive case management. Right, that's an output. Students receive diplomas. Yep, that's an outcome because it means that they graduated. Pamphlets received by community members. That would be an output. Youth taking the practice SAT tests. Also an output. Classes attended. That's an output too. Increased use of contraception. That would be an outcome. So let's look again at the National School Lunch Program. What would an outcome of the National School Lunch Program be? Again, you can write your answer here, and then choose the answer from below that would best fit that answer. So right now you're probably thinking, wait, there's more than one kind of outcome. And you are absolutely right. So you can think of outcomes as change leading change. So they're steps or building blocks that you have to go through in order to get to the long-term outcome. So for instance, this little orange man standing on those 4 stones probably didn't just hop up there, probably walked up those tiers of steps. Let's go back to the weight loss example. Maybe the first step is that little orange man is attending free exercise classes. Maybe he's gaining knowledge of how to exercise. He's changing his attitude that exercise can be fun. And then he's changing his behavior and exercising more. So we have a gain in knowledge, a change in attitude, and a change in behavior. And that's how he's going to lose weight. This can be our short-term outcome, our intermediate outcome, and our long-term outcome. So short-term outcomes are changes that usually take place as a direct result of an output, say skills or knowledge. In this case, the short-term outcome may be that community members gain knowledge of healthy recipes. Intermediate outcomes are changes that may take a little bit longer to take place. For instance, attitude or behavior changes. In this example, it may be that community members eat healthier food. So outcomes build off each other. There's no hard and fast rule for this, but this generally works. So all roads lead to... No, Tuan, they lead to the long-term outcome. The long-term outcome is the broadest change the program hopes to achieve. Again, it's achievable, it's aligned with the organization's mission, it's relevant to the context and the target population, and it's maximum impact. So if our short-term outcome is community members gain knowledge of healthy recipes, and our intermediary outcome is community members eat healthier food, our long-term outcome is going to be community members lose weight. This is obviously very simplified so that we can show you one row of outcomes and how they lead to the long-term outcome.